here with Dr. Carlene Reid, who is running for Ward 8 rep for the State Board of Education in Washington, D.C. I'm so glad to have you. I wanted to get as many candidates. Honestly, I know you all have other things to do. I know that early voting starts tomorrow, but I just wanted the people that I'm connected to, right? The teachers, the administrators, the students, the families, to be able to get a glimpse into not only the names that they see on the signs all over the city, but also just a little bit of an introspective look at how these folks will really change and shape their lives over the next 4 years. So if you could introduce yourself and your background and what's led you to this point to get us started, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Carlene Reid. You all can call me Carlene. Honestly, I think people have a hard time remembering Carlene. It gets Charlene, I get Harley, I get Arlene. So I just, for campaign purposes, I'm saying like Dr. Reid, I might as well use my credentials to stick a little bit. But anywho, Carlene Reid, I'm candidate for State Board of Education here in Ward 8, born in DC at Columbia Hospital for Women, which I think now is some condominiums, raised in Prince George. Yep.
DC.
DC story, raised in Prince George's County, Maryland, came up through PG County Public Schools, and went on to Hampton University, where I majored in speech pathology, and then made a transition into special education, which is so funny because I believe, kind of life events always bring you back. I had an aunt who was a home health aide for individuals with disabilities, and their families had kind of turned them to, provide respite to someone else. And so my aunt, because she worked really odd hours, the only way that she could hang out with the family was if she brought her individuals with disabilities to like our cookouts and all our family functions. So that's kind of where I was introduced to the field. And I just swear life just kept resetting me. Everything was, for grad school, they were like, yeah, we'll pay you to go to Florida State, but you got to look at all, you have to major, and not major, but you have to, study autism and families who have children with autism. And I'm like, first I'm like, yeah, I just want to go to school for free. Then it just really became a passion of mine. And again, just kind of life kept steering me back to special education. I moved back to DC in 2008 after being at Florida State to get my master's. Florida is too conservative, I said, or at least Tallahassee, because I know the Miami people are gonna be mad at me. So Tallahassee was too slow, and I said, I gotta get back to DC. At first, I thought I was gonna go back to South. Actually, you're from Houston. I wanted to move to Houston. I had a little boyfriend, but I was gonna go that way. Nope, came back to DC, moved back home for a period, worked at St. Colette of Greater Washington, which is a school for children with disabilities. I was living at home in my twin bed as a grown woman, saving up money to buy a home.
Yes.
And then I purchased in historic Anacostia, which actually is right around the corner from where I was christened. I actually went to my parents were married at a church called John S. Thomas. It is also went through a couple name changes, but the building is still there right around the corner from my home. And yeah, that's where I am. I've been in the DC education landscape for about 15 years in a variety of roles. I am, of course, in the classroom. I'm the only person in my race who has substantial experience in the classroom. Then I went on to doing evaluations for DCPS. So I've seen charter and I've seen DCPS. Then I got my doctorate for free, which again, life just keeps staring you back. One day I was bored in DCPS, read an email, Drexel was offering a free doctorate. I said, hey, I'm a homeowner, can't afford no more debt, but I can go to school for free. So in special education. So again, life experiences. So yeah, finally finished last year in 2019, but I would say kind of what led me to run, that's kind of my background. What led me to run is in 2016, I witnessed the national elections. And I'm an educator. Like, I am not your career politician. I've been in the classroom, but 2016 really kind of highlighted the depth of expertise and what happens when we are willing to shift away from the traditional politics. But then I think we just took a swing way too far, away from traditional politics. And we unfortunately reaped the benefits of having national leadership who just has no expertise in what they're doing, no experience. So it really honed in on the importance of local government. And I was working at our DC State Education Agency, which is OSSI. And I'm like, well, DC is doing pretty well on its own. Well, I was especially in the early childhood landscape, but I'm like, you know what? We need really good local leadership to protect DC from whatever has happened nationally. So at the time I was working for DC government. You can't run for really anything for DC government, but I kind of had this state board of education thing in the back of my mind. I even came up with my slogan. I always had this book and a let's read in the back of my mind. And then finally, 2019, yeah, I finished my doctorate. I started a new job for the federal government, and you can actually run for the state board of education because it's nonpartisan. And I just kind of watched the landscape, saw that there was a transition for our current state board of education representative. And I said, let's try it. Like, let's go for it. You have the experience. Yeah, I have really rare experience. And it's something that now I'm getting comfortable with saying, because I usually am a little more like humble and reserved, but I really look back and I'm like, not everybody has experience in the classroom making policy on the national level. So I said, well, why not give that experience back to my ward? So here we are, running for state board of education. We're here.
Running for Ward 8 representative, State Board of Education. And we're so happy that you are running. And really the purpose of these conversations is so, like I said, so that people know who they're choosing. And you all have beautiful signs and they're all over the city and you could see them on every corner. And still, because of our busy lives, and I know for the students that I serve, a lot of their parents, they may be working a lot or managing virtual school at home to make, right? And so everything is virtual. So now we've got to bring you all's campaigns to the forefront. So thank you so much for being with me this evening. And let's just jump right in.
Thanks for using your platform.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. This work fuels me, like I said, in the earlier version of our intro. I always had a passion for education, but once I got to GW and really started to get into policy, and you, just like you said about the 2016 election, that was really when it was like, okay, let's unpack this local thing, because locus of control.
Right. Let's stop making these individuals who've been the political scheme forever. They keep making the same decisions. They're getting us nowhere. We even witnessed it with not just, the current president, but we also witnessed a beautiful transition of, kind of Congress, where you have your non-traditional politicians who are getting their seats in, young women who weren't in politics, who are doing great things. And I think it just shows that, hey guys, it doesn't take, you to be, somebody's son, because it's usually that.
I was gonna say, you don't have to, you know what I'm saying? I mean, everything takes a little bit of that. Everything takes some money, but yeah, you can be a person who actually just loves children and has a passion for people being well and people getting the best service and education that they need. I love the fact that you come from a special education background too. So let's jump into some questions. First, I know if you get the seat, right, you have 4 years, right, which sounds like a while, but from what I noticed and from just talking to folks, it passes by really quick. So we're curious, what is your vision, at least for the first couple of years? What are sort of your top 2 or your top 3 areas or gaps with regard to equity in the schools, be that around curriculum or teacher effectiveness or just anything? What are those areas that you really want to target?
Yeah, so my plan is to execute my platform. And again, not to shade anybody else, but again, I think it just says the quality of the individual that I am and candidate that I am. It's been I've been the only one who has an articulated platform in my race. So my platform is to achieve equity in funding, keep the community engaged, and thoughtful policy. So I will basically start with implementing my platform, but initially to just kind of get things rolling, I do just need to get a temperature check of what's happening. So I'm not necessarily a listening tour, because I feel like that's really cute and it wastes time and you get cute pictures, but it doesn't really get to the work of things. And I've actually started doing a bit of a listening tour before COVID hit, getting into Blue High School, Hart, Simon, pairing with the ANC commissioner, who was just like, I'm in the schools, come along with me. So basically doing both of being in the schools, but then also executing that platform, but kind of zooming out, probably that's maybe the first 6 months doing that. But I would say about year 1, year 2, the major things that are impacting the quality of schools are 1, mayoral control. The mayor controls, we don't see anything like this in any other state, where the mayor controls all aspects of the educational system. So, you know, and it's not like necessarily a critique on her, even though I haven't been 1,000% pleased, but I understand we are a big city, we have a lot of need. But that's even more reason of saying, hey, maybe you should like let the people who are educational experts handle the education piece, and you do all the other fund development, city, homelessness, health, all those other things. But anyway, ending mayoral control. I've been partnering with a lot of the progressive candidates. If you watch, this is a good opportunity to do it. We're experiencing a shift on DC City Council, where we have progressive leadership like Janice Lewis-George, Brianna Nadeau. I know our Ward 8 Council member, Trayon White, I believe would be in line with releasing mayoral control over education. So I think it's time to basically queue it up. The Washington Metropolitan vote was basically a temperature check for what it would look like. And if you know, unfortunately, the students lost their school, but it was by one vote. So we can get that one vote to just shift over, we'll be good to go. The other piece of it though is funding. Our funding formula does not match our need. And what happens is we have a per pupil funding formula where schools get about, let me see, I might be a little rusty with my Aussie numbers, but about $14,000 per child. That even went up in COVID. So DC is the bomb, y'all. Somehow in COVID, we bumped that up. $14,000 per child. But the thing is, when you have a school that has maybe like 300 kids, but like over here, the need might feel like 600, you're ultimately under-resourced. And then we have issues where it's historic under-resourcing. So where I lived in historic Anacostia for 7 years. There was a period of time where Black and brown children could not go to school here, and really had to travel far, really couldn't even live over here, had to travel far distances. And then all of a sudden, literally, I remember, because I used to go to church over here, they closed the street, the one road down into downtown DC, shut that down. And it was basically one way in, one way out. And that's exactly what the resources look like. One way in, and we don't know who made it out, you know? And we were really fending for ourselves. We are experiencing that a generation later. So now we need to, when we say equity, we need to pump into Ward 8, Ward 7, the resources that we have historically lacked. It's a reparation conversation. So that's what my mission is. And again, with that progressive voice on the DC City Council, I think we can get it done pairing with the State Board of Education, who, all right, we want people who are experts. If we're saying we want to release mayoral control, if we're saying we are ready to, you know, start dealing some with money, we have to have individuals who not just mean well, but are able to do well. And I'm that candidate, I feel like, in Ward 8.
Yes. I mean, really, Carlene, I mean, we can end the conversation now. I mean, I just got excited just listening, because your energy and your passion and your fire makes me passionate and fiery as well. And I know that folks at home are feeling that too as they're watching this. So thank you for that. I want to jump into sort of the topic of the day, right? About COVID and reopening. And particularly as a teacher myself, and I happen to work in a charter at this point in time, but I have a lot of friends, some that we both know. I know you know plenty of teachers who are just really afraid right now with regard to reopening, and they love their students. It's not a matter, you know, teachers are some of the most hardworking people on the face of the planet, and we know that. But they're also real concerns about safety. And I think about people who work for the government in places that are not full of children, and children who are like adolescents and sometimes have a hard time just like staying focused in class, like not even distracted, just developmentally. And so now we're adding rules about masks. And so what's your position on the reopening of schools?
Yeah, and again, this taps into my expertise from the state, actually being in the classroom, being state government, and being the federal government. I'll start on the federal side. The federal government has no right to ask teachers to return, to mandate and tie funding to having teachers return to the classroom. That's what we're experiencing in our cities. And it's really unfortunate, because what you just said about we as a federal employee, we don't have to, nobody's making us go back until there's a vaccine or a cure. And that's nowhere near on the horizon. So why are you okay? And DC government is the same way. The mayor and any other DC agency outside of schooling, for some reason, no, to my knowledge, talking to people that I know and aren't mandated to go back until there's a vaccination or a cure. So why are we mandating for our educational system? It's almost like a disrespect to our educational system.
Mm.
But anyway, in the school level, what we really need is like we need a comprehensive plan for the city to say these are the standards for returning to school. And then we need a school specific plan because each school, DCPS charter, from DCPS to DCPS, charter has its own nuances that could, shift COVID in either way. And we're very heavily reliant on other networks in our city to work in order for education to work. Because we have school choice, we have a lot of children, and not knocking school choice at all, but we have children who are traveling across town on the metro. WMATA said, and this was WMATA at the beginning of COVID, said they weren't going to be ready to fully reopen in April 2021.
Wow.
So, and I've watched Metro buses drive past me and be at capacity, and I'm looking like this looks like a super spreader event.
Yeah.
So I think we're moving too fast. And even in the social emotional aspect of, I know people want to say trauma for students, but just talking about the transitions in life, we're educators. We know there are certain transitions. We do not transition back to school right before Thanksgiving break. You need those natural transitions. You either go back in January, you go back in the spring, or you go back in the summer, so that we all can just kind of mentally prepare ourselves. I think we just need to have some honest conversations. And I have talked to families. Is it a concern of that you need respite? I've talked to a father of an 11-year-old child. He's an essential worker. And he said, people will come for me if they found out that I'm leaving my child at home. And so he wants his child to learn. So it's like, how do we make these balances? It's not, I think we are rushing things. I think we shouldn't move back until there's zero community spread. I personally know a couple of cases. One, my best friend's uncle passed away. He was an NJROTC instructor at a school in New Orleans. Wow. I have a current friend who moved to South Dakota, who you would think, rural America. He is recovering, and he's in the school recovering from COVID. He has secondary complications. And then I was talking to a parent today from Montana, and they're back 5 days a week. And she's saying they get calls every day where it's like, somebody in the building was exposed, or the child will come home and say, hi, the person next door to me, sitting next to me, is gone for the last 2 weeks. And they're like, that's a quarantine case. I think it's just, we're provoking too much anxiety. I think we have to kind of take away that American productivity that we always have to be on. And let's figure out a way that, we need to be safe right now. Yes, there are certain consequences that come with it. But how can we be safe? How can we preserve maybe the current learning? But right now, it's safety and health is key.
That's our priority. Yeah. I have to agree with you. And I'm not here to choose any candidates for anybody, but I do think this is where like partisanship, like this has nothing to do with partisanship. This is about the health of people. Period.
Yeah.
But I've asked other candidates that I definitely want the folks out there to know what your position is on COVID and reopening, whether it's teachers, families, students. So thank you for addressing that very directly too.
For COVID, it's community, because no matter which stakeholder you pick you want to allegedly align with, they're going to come back to a family. They're going to either come back to a building. They're going to come back to whoever their loved one is at the home with them. And who knows where that person might go. And it could possibly be a touch point for spread. So we got to think about
the contract tracing thing. And I saw there was an app. But the tracing alone is enough to foster just anxiety. So we're definitely on the same page. And I know so many people are on the same page. And I know you talked about the parent. I know it's a tug. I know.
Nobody wants to say that their child is going to end up, quote, behind. But I also want us to shift our minds, because all these tests are basically math and reading. What can sometimes I worry, and I get it. It's a struggle right now. But I also want us to encourage, like, what are some of the positive, where we can? I know everything's not positive, rainbows and sunshine, but what are some of the positive aspects? Are we getting closer as families because now we have more families?
Wow.
Are we relying on our neighbors more and talking to that neighbor that you never even talked to because you needed that roll of toilet paper when things got really real in March when we couldn't find anything, so like, definitely it's hardships right now. I know there are children in homes who are seeking to get away, but shoot, there might even be a neighbor who has stepped up and said, I know you have, baby, you got a hard home environment. Come on over for dinner and give your mom respite. That's happening too. And I think we need to elevate those stories as well. I know we are suffering, but there's also some wins that we need to give ourselves credit for.
And not even by virtue of these interviews, that's one of the first times I've just heard someone say that, like that, and I saw it on your platform too, around your first point, I believe, or maybe it's your second point, around playtime, like just like community, and that village mentality, right? That like I grew up on, your folks probably grew up on. Yeah. So
no, I was actually that the reason why that ended up in my platform, and it probably looks really superficial of me, but because I was in the community group watching some new parents in the Ward 8 community say that there was no group over here. They were trying to access another group, I think in Capitol Hill, and the Capitol Hill group told them no. And I'm like, well, then let's create our own. Like, and we can do it with, some self-sufficiency. And then also I would say I was the child who was helped raised by my neighbor, helped raise me. And my mom will say thank you every time. My parents got divorced at age 6. My dad was around, but my mom, just being a girl, my mom ended up with custody of me. And she was working 3 jobs and had a funnel cake business to sustain being a single parent. And so I had a neighbor who was just, thankfully, that was her ministry in life, and was just like, okay, I stayed at her house anytime I needed to, even educational opportunities. If I got in trouble at school, I knew I was getting in trouble twice. I was getting in trouble with my play aunt Barbara and my mama. So, and it got to the point that I'm like, well, I got to go through both of these women. Like, this is just extra, but it was community that really raised me. And I think, we can't get so reliant on ourselves. We have to bring everybody in and throw everything in the pot. Whatever you got, the community needs it, and we can benefit from it.
Absolutely. Village. Absolutely. I have another area that I wanted to touch on. So you talked a little bit about, and we know the DC educational landscape is full of charter schools as well as public schools, right? And this is a city in America where school choice, right? Like parents can say, hey, even though that school might be 30 minutes away from right, a 30-minute train ride or what have you, that is the school that I choose for my student to go to. However, we know there are other intended and mainly unintended consequences of that. We have like really low enrolled DCPS schools right now. So what are your feelings around school choice and like trajectory wise? Like, is it okay for parents to be able to say, hey, I want my student to go to whatever school I think they should go to, but we also know like funding, and you talk about that per pupil funding. Are we on the right track with the charter public school position that we have, with just kind of saying, hey, I want to authorize a school, let's go? What do you think?
We are so off balance. It's getting to the point that it's quality and not quantity. Or I'm sorry, it's getting quantity, meaning we are bringing everyone in. Everyone has a magic solution, but then give them a couple of years and it's not quality, or they're running out of funds, and the community is suffering for it, because then it becomes, I've seen children have a shuffle in the middle of a school year because their charter closed. And I'm speaking from someone who, I've worked in a charter school. I've also worked in DCPS. And I will say, I feel a piece of me is like, my personal opinion is we cannot have strong communities without strong neighborhood school options. I personally, I'm not a parent yet. And look, at this point, they call it what, high, what is it, maternity age? I don't know what it's called, but I'll be an older
in the
mama.
same place, girl.
Yeah, and so it's getting to a point that it's just like, I might not have a child, but okay, but I live across the street from a school. And I was like, if I ever have a child in here, whether it be my biological child or otherwise, your butt is going right down them steps and into the school across the street, because I should have a right to that quality there. I feel like it's a lot of times an added stressor. And I feel like we should explore, why have we even gotten to the point where we are saying that corporations who aren't even DC based are able to come in and, quote, save our educational system? But I get, parents are making a choice where they're saying, I don't want to have my child possibly be in an environment that is allegedly, not the quality or have the options that I'm seeking. And I say that, I get that 1,000%. But I also look just across the landscape of DC. Ward 3 has not had a charter school for 10 years.
Wow.
Map. You can look on map. They do the data. So I'm like, well, then why does this? And they're getting new schools. They're getting like 2 new schools next year.
CPS schools.
Yes, 2 new neighborhood schools. Yes.
Wow.
So I think it goes back to that community piece where you're seeing communities. We have to demand that, even if we're not parents, we have to rally behind. I strongly believe strong neighborhood schools are an element, fabrics of strong communities. And we have to make sure that we at least have that option, that layer of strong community schools. And then charters are supposed to be incubators for innovation. So yes, if you have a charter school that looks a little different, I have seen some that have really great, kind of models like social justice. And even the one I worked at, St. Coletta, is just special education, but I worry sometimes when I see schools that could totally do the same thing as DCPS come in and they, they're getting this funding, and then we turn 3 years later and we're having just more quality conversations. So yeah, I guess long story short, I believe in strong neighborhood schools. I do think charter is an added layer of quality, but even in that, I always say, if you're in the business of education, you have to be in the full business of education. So that means you are able to provide every resource. You're not doing sneaky things like saying this is a German education program because you want certain students in it. That kind of stuff. We don't have time.
And that's a conversation that's a little swept under the rug conversation right there. But exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's what we are seeing happening. So yeah, I think we shouldn't force anything, but I think as a community we can say, and I guess to close on it too, I've seen communities do it. Even being over here for the 7 years I've been, Van Ness Elementary School, which is a DC public school over in Ward 6, right over the bridge from me, it was storage, and we would go there for PD, and it looked like an old rickety building. That community right there in Navy Yard said no. We want this to reopen as our public school. And when they reopened with a wait list, and they reopened with pretty good significant quality indicators for what we currently measure quality. That's a whole nother thing too.
Yeah.
But it reopened as a strong school. But I think there was just a whole thing of when a community gets behind saying this is what we want for our neighborhood because we've seen what quality neighborhood schools provide, how the community can move the matrix for education. And my plan is to lead the community in that, where we can maybe establish either, work on our feeder patterns, how can we basically go from school to school, connect the dots, and at least get just that strong foundation of education. And then, support the added layers. But ultimately I support all schools, all students that are currently here, but I think maybe we have added too many into our network to the point that we can't track them, we can't fully fund them, and students are ultimately bearing the brunt of that.
Well, you're diving deep, Carlene. I want to go a little deeper before we get out of here, if that's okay.
Sure.
You touched a little bit on assessment tests, a little bit. But of course, we're in DC, right? So there's evaluation systems, teacher evaluation systems, and there's an entire conversation that we could have about tenure and teacher quality and teacher effectiveness and impact, and is that the best evaluation system? And so many people have benefited from impact, right? Like excellent teachers have gotten bonuses, and but does that mean that test scores have gone up, and that or forget test scores, does that mean that student achievement is actually what is your view on the impact system or systems like it? And what do we really need in DC to make sure that we're putting the best talent, right? So from the beginning, the hiring too, on the front end, right? And on the back end, what is the best avenue in your view and based on your expertise in terms of making sure that we have the best talent in front of our kids every day?
Okay, best talent in front of our kids every day. I think it starts with inception programs, meaning how are we DC bringing teachers into our network? And I hear you talk to a lot of old school educators, they go back to the days when we had DC Teachers College, which is now, I believe, UDC. We need our own homegrown education programs where we can basically insert standards for what we want our education, we want our educators to be trained, and then support them in, okay, if you come through our network of teacher training, then we'll either pay it back or we'll somehow supplement and work with you to come back into our DCPS or our charter schools, or whatever our educational network is, and contribute back to that. Because right now we don't have really any standard. We have people who, and I get it, DC is a sexy place to be, especially when I came back to DC, we're 08 Obama, everybody was coming on. But how do we, even let our kids in high school know that education is a quality industry that's reputable, industry that's respected, and then get them to go into programs. They know the students, they know, and then they can move into, our educational system. So I think starting with teacher preparation, OSSE has to take control of that, and say what our standards are. Again, I've seen states do it where they say, you know what, if you want to be a general education teacher, well, guess what? You also have to take special, I've seen dually, and I'm in the states, I know we're not supposed to judge, but there's certain states that I'm just like, ooh, you've been at the bottom of the barrel and you, that's bad. But they're starting to make gains because they're saying well, we can't have, people just trained one way. It creates a shortage. DC needs to think about its teacher preparation. And then I will go into the piece about the impact evaluation. And again, I remember getting evaluated on both ends, being in a charter school and then actually getting impacted through DCPS. Honestly, it got to the point as an experienced educator, it was just a formality of, okay, I'm gonna show up, what you gonna give me this time? All right, we're gonna keep it going. I'm gonna keep teaching, I'm gonna keep doing whatever I'm gonna do to the best of my students. But I do think we need to give one, I remember those first two observations, as a new therapist, and being very awkward and having, I went from the environment where you're learning how to be a therapist to actually doing it and getting paid for it. It's a different landscape. And we need to make sure we're building in grace and mentorship so that people can learn their own either teaching styles, classrooms, what's your flavor, and let them bring that. And sometimes the evaluations can get so trying to turn you into a robot that it doesn't allow you to let your personality show and really get to learn what your strengths are and your weaknesses are as an educator, and just be a professional. Yeah. And then I'll also say impact on the other side. Almost played with my life, not in a bad way, but literally, I remember the first time I got impacted, the lady said, oh, I can't give you that score because we got to show that you made progress. And I'm like, well, ma'am, if enough of y'all decided I needed to, yes,
you were already here, but that score didn't necessarily reflect that you have somewhere to go. So,
and I came into DCPS at that point as probably year 7 of my career. And I'm like, oh, so you're telling me I get a 1 because you got to show I'm making progress. I'm like, you just can't honor that this was quality instruction. Okay, but because of what you have to show. So I'm like, we need to, at the end of the day, make an evaluation system. I would like to see something that gives you 360, because we're seeing also just really weird, if somebody likes somebody, or if somebody supervisor don't have time, they're just going to, and they haven't really been observing you. I think a 360 evaluation will keep things fair, because the teacher can rank those around them. They can rank teacher to teacher, which is really good feedback. They can rank their administrator. And then the 360, especially at the administrator